at a short man's podium instead of the one that's made for people that are 7 foot tall. I always felt like I'm Ross Perot standing behind this thing. Right? Older people would understand that joke. Younger people, you can Google it. Anyhow. Okay, so happy anniversary.
Yay!
Oh, yeah.
1 year.
1 year.
Not her and I.
Yeah, no.
Been 29 and some
Just
change.
seems like a year for you.
Right. Yeah, so we started a year ago on the portion, right? So it was actually technically October the 17th is when we started Ahava. And so now that we're starting over on the Torah cycle, it's the Jewish New Year. So
Right.
October 17th will be our Gregorian New Year, so our year. So this is our second time going through congregational startup. You know, the other one in there, Sherwood's been going on for 12 years now, I think. 09. Is that good math?
Sounds like it.
That works. Yeah, so we started that one in September, actually September the 18th of 2009. And so here we are 1 year into the latest version, hopefully the last version. Well, version, I don't know if that was the right word, but next journey, however you want to word that out. So anyway, here we are, and we're very excited. And obviously, a bunch of people decided to take a week off after last week. So yeah, we're going to talk about that at the end of service. It was fun. Hey, everybody in here who can say they shut down a television station, raise their hand.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and do that.
We'll talk about that. It was, when I say it was fun, it was fun. It was fun. We can laugh about it now. I was on the verge of tears a couple times. Okay, so as I said, we were going to start doing some things on this prophetic stuff that I've kind of been teasing Billy about it for about 3 years, off and on for about the last 8 months, I guess, with y'all. And so we started that with introducing you to paralytic or parallel thought on prophetic things. And so this week and part of next week, we will talk about how those things have multiple fulfillments. And we're going to look at the creation story actually might be the layout for how God was going to do things. In the prophetic timetable, the book of Isaiah, I think it says that the end was declared from the beginning. And I think we'll be able to look at that. Next week, we'll be touching on a little bit on Babel, since that's in Genesis 11, next week's portion, and how Babel was the beginning of the last reference in the book of Revelation of Babylon. So we'll kind of see how that plays out in a parallel and multiple fulfillment as well. And then, I got some other things I need to tie in that aren't specifically related to Babel that we will get out. All right, but this week we're going to talk about this in the creation. Wait,
You have it, not me.
you're right there, not the remote. My eyeballs. Okay, so the question is, the Bible says that in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth. So is it a metaphor? Is it literal? Is it symbology? What is it?
Yes.
Was it a literal? Right. So the perfect Jewish answer is yes. Okay, well, was it 6,000 years or 6 million? Yes. I will tell a story of Miss Judy Noose. She taught a class on she taught on biblical history, not history of the Bible. I'm not sure if I said that right, but anyway, it's right because I said it. What she was talking about was time, and she was showing how Bible history and human history parallel. And she gave a great parallel to help us understand how both the young earth creationists are correct and the old earth creationists are correct. That the world is both 6,000 years old and it is also 15 billion years old. And the story she said was there was a man who went on a journey, and he promised his wife that every day that he was gone, he would write her a letter. And it was a several-month journey. Well, every day the letters would come. But then after a couple weeks, the letters started staggering. They started coming every second day or every third day. And then they started coming every week or every 3 or 4 weeks, right? So he returns from the journey and says, she was mad. She said, "You were going to write me every day." He goes, "I did." But the further away he got, the longer it took for the letters to get there. So though they were written every day, she didn't get them every day. The same is true with time and light and space and all that other kind of stuff. And this is the point she made. That as we look and measure time, the world is only 6,000 years old. But when you measure the distance and how far the time travels and all that other kind of stuff, it appears to the manner in which they're measuring time that the world is 15 billion years old. So how they're measuring time according to how we normally measure time would appear to be so, but it's not. So it's both. Anyway, I thought that was a good story that she told to help kind of understand some things. All right, so what we got to ask ourselves is, which is it? I personally take a literal account, a literal reading of the story of Genesis. I am a young earth creationist. I believe the world is only 6,000 years old. We'll get into a little bit about why that. That's not the whole purpose of this, but just to explain it. And the reason is because if we say that the 6 days are just an unknown period of time, if we just say that they were just some random, each day was 1,000 years, or each day was 1,000,000 years, or 1,000,000,000 years, then what that means is now we can make Shabbat any day. We can make Shabbat a period of time. So if it wasn't a literal 7 days and God rested on a literal 7th day, then that means that when somebody says, well, we have the Christian Sabbath on Sunday, the Jewish Sabbath is on Friday, and the Jewish Sabbath is on Saturday, and the Muslim Sabbath is on Saturday. And all that statements could be true, except they're not according to the Bible. There's only one Sabbath. It's on the 7th day. It's a literal day. Or we can go, well, I just set like Wednesday aside. I tithe a period of rest to God. Well, then it's not the Sabbath. It's not 7 days. Or, well, it's a period of time, so we're in rest. It's a millennial. It's a 1,000,000-year period of rest. So it's not literal. You're supposed to just rest in the Spirit, right? See how you can take it and just run all over the place if God didn't say, no, it was 6 days, and on the 7th day I rested, and on the 7th literal day you rest also. I also take a literal reading of the ages of the people in Genesis. Because if you don't, if you say that those were numbers that meant things, right? They all had specific meanings, and some of the rabbis will tell you that. The problem is when does it stop? So when do the ages of Noah and Adam and Methuselah and all of these guys stop? Do we stop with Abraham? Because he was only 175 when he died versus the 969 of Methuselah, or the 600, actually 900 for Adam and 900 something for Noah, right? This actually blows some people's mind that Noah would actually been, Shem would have been alive at the time of Abraham. And then Shem would have heard directly from Noah. Noah heard it from Methuselah. Methuselah would have heard from Adam. So Abraham could have got 5th generation knowledge, if you think about it, from the creation. So it wasn't like it was told, yes, it was told over a 1,600-year period of time, but it was actually only told from 5 people. And it doesn't, it can't be real. Well, what if it is? Because now we know that the ages descend, right? It goes from super long ages to living almost a millennium. I got it up. I can't do any more. How's that? Okay. To Abraham being 175, and then the ages just go down. And so then we go, well, those are just metaphors. Okay, so then what about Abraham? Was he real? Well, of course he was real, right? He was the father of Isaac and Jacob. Okay, but were they real? Or were their numbers just metaphors too? Because I think Isaac lived to be like 110 or something like that. So what was it? Were they just metaphors or symbologies of Jacob, who was going to have the 12 tribes? It was going to be the 12 nations. Is that just a metaphor? Okay, well, what about Moses? Well, that was just a story to give us the law. Okay, so he's not real either. What about David? What about Samuel? And if all of those were just stories, then I got a real humdinger for you about a guy that lived in the 1st century that supposedly died and rose on the 3rd day.
Right.
So we got to stop it at some point. And then, so otherwise, if we question that line, then anything could be a story, and it doesn't have any real application. And if you do that, then people have a real problem with Israel today. Because God made a promise in several verses in the Old Testament that he was going to take his people, lead them into exile, and bring them back. Yeshua confirmed it. Moses said it in Deuteronomy 30, I believe it is. Isaiah says it in Isaiah 11, and Yeshua said it was going to happen in Luke 21, that they'd be led captive in all the world and now they're restored. I say this a lot. If you don't need faith to believe in God. Just turn on the news or open up a map. Israel existed because God said they would exist. God said they would return, and they did. And I believe it's because that the age is coming to a close, and I'll point that out here in a little bit. But because I believe all those things, to be literal in real ages and real time periods, to me it makes the most sense. Otherwise, you can go anywhere with anything, right? And that's what a lot of people have done, a lot of crazy theology. And because if you don't understand parallels, and since we're here, we'll talk about it. Has anybody ever heard that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are two different accounts of creation?
Only from fools.
Anybody ever heard of the gap theory?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? Gap theory is that there's a difference between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. That it was in that period of time when it says, in the beginning God created, or created God is how it literally reads in Hebrew. And then all of a sudden, then he said, let there be light. There was this period of time, and that's the old earth, and that's the demonic world, that's the dinosaur world. That's that world, because they can't reconcile some of their time. And it's just so happened we have a great visitor today who is going to be able to really expound upon this, because he's really smart on this area. I got to use small words, but he actually wrote a paper and talks about time and space and distance and understanding this kind of stuff. But I lost my point. The gap theory, thank you. So the gap, just because we can't reconcile that, what do we do about all this time? Well, then they go, well, Genesis 1 is just another story, and then Genesis 2 is another story. No, it's the same story. One's told from God's perspective, and the other one's told from man's perspective. Because Genesis 1, and I would argue that this is the first parallel. Because Genesis 1 is saying how God created the heavens and the earth, and then Genesis 2 is focused on man. It's primarily speaking about man in Genesis 2. So now the focus on the creation is the same story, but now brought down into the man perspective. So again, another parallel. Okay. All right, but like I said, this lecture is not about making a case for young earth, or to make a case why Christians should keep the Shabbat. We're going to have another discussion for that. But rather, I think this is to show a parallel and to show how I believe God's prophetic timetable is told in the creation account. And I say potential, because this could be the second time I've ever been wrong. Maybe the third. Right? I think of all of my great qualities, the humility is my best quality. Right? But I say that because I say potential fulfillment, because I will explain towards the end why we have to be careful with emphaticisms. It's why I don't like it at all when people get very hyper-dogmatic about things, because you have to be willing to go, I might be wrong. I don't know. Maybe there's only one guy that knows everything, and he's not come back yet, right? So until he comes back and straightens us all out. I've heard it said that there's only one story, there's only one truth. We're all just comparing crib notes, right? We're just trying to figure it all out. He's the only one that's got the whole truth. So we might be wrong. And because I say this is a potential timetable, I am not setting a date. Seriously, I am not setting a date. No, seriously, I am not setting a date.
But now you're going to set a date.
But I'm going to set a date. I didn't write them down. I actually took some of this, sat on a shelf until I woke up around 5:30, 6:30 this morning, and I finished tweaking it because I literally did something I rarely do Tuesday and Wednesday, part of Thursday. I did nothing. Right? And just got home and from work and just maybe had some adult beverages and watched television and just decompressed from the last week, because it was fun. So I was wrapping this up this morning, so I didn't get all the scriptures on there. And one of them is in Thessalonians, where he said, you have no need that I write to you, right, concerning the times and the seasons, because he said, you remember when I was there. He said, but it will not come to a surprise to you, but it will come to a surprise to them, meaning those who are outside the camp. So we cannot know the dates, but we can know the times or the seasons, right? So we can have a rough idea, is what he was saying. So I think that once we start seeing some of this stuff, we can see that we're in a period of time in which all of these things are starting to fulfill. But we will find out for sure within the next 10 years. And I'll explain that in a little bit. Not yet. Okay. In the Talmud, a collection of rabbis arguing about things in the Mishnah. Mishnah is a collective of oral tradition that the rabbis believed that they inherited from Moses and to Joshua to the great Sanhedrin, and it was passed down orally. I don't necessarily agree with all of that, but they still have these traditions and these teachings. Because they were given the oracles of God, I will look at some of this stuff in Talmud, Mishnah, some reference stuff, just like I would listen to any preacher today and go, hey, that guy's got some revelation. So rabbis might have some revelation too. Talmud says, Rabbi Katina says that the world will exist for 6,000 years, and there will be a 1,000 of destruction. We have a teaching which is in agreement with Rabbi Katina. Is that really just the first page? Wow. He says, as the seventh is the sabbatical year, 1 in 7 years, likewise the world will rest for 1,007. 1,000 years in your eyes are like yesterday, as past Psalms 90 in verse 4. Nachmanides, different than the other guy. Commentary on the Torah in Genesis 2:3, quoting the Kabbalistic sources, says each of the 6 days of creation correspond to a 1,000-year period of future history. Talmud Tractate Avodah Zarah says the world will exist for 6,000 years, 2 millennia void, 2 millennia of Torah, 2 millennia of the age of Mashiach. So 2 days of creation, 2 days of Torah, 2 days of Messiah. This is actually a problem for the rabbis. We're in the 5th and 6th days, no Messiah, or has it? So if you remember, Peter, I believe, quoting from the book of Joel, when he says that in the last days, right, that the Spirit of God will be poured out upon all flesh, that your sons and daughters will prophesy, and your old men dreams and visions. I don't remember the end, but he quoted that. And he said that these are those days. Well, actually, in Joel it doesn't say the last days. Peter kind of put the last days in there. It says in that time, I believe, is how it's actually quoted in Joel. I heard a teaching years ago, and it was the first time I heard this. It was about a woman named Billy Brim, and she first taught, and I first heard that what this period. And so it's possible that the last days were the last 2,000 years, the day 5 and 6 of creation. So then, in the last days, in the last 2 days of creation, during the time of Messiah, is when the Spirit of God will be poured out upon all flesh. It wasn't just held to the Jewish people like it was then, but everybody in that period of time. So that's what Peter was possibly quoting, and then that's where this idea comes from, that in the last days, and then keep in mind, and we'll talk about it here again in a minute, 2 days of creation, 2 days of Torah, 2 days of Messiah. Okay, so it's generally accepted that a guy named Rabbi Yosef ben Halavta, a sage of the Mishnah period in the 2nd century AD, made the calculation for the Jewish calendar. And his math said the world began on October the 7th of 3760. So that means there's about a 240-year difference in the creation calendar that when people ask, because we're somewhere around 57, 80, something now, 89, 90, I don't know what year it is. And so it's off. Well, he just used their sources, right? He just used the rabbinic sources, and the biblical timeline is all that he had. So that's why they came off with that. He's the one that created that. Well, this presents a problem. This whole difference of 240 years, and then that being 3760, because then you go, hey, Rabbi, you know that whole 2 days of creation thing, that 2 days of Torah thing? That doesn't really line up. It's a 250-year swing. I'll give you a couple years, right? I'm not going to give you a couple hundred, you know. So, anyways, that's why this disagreement is interesting, right? Because if they believe that based on their calculations, they can't give an answer, right? Because this is one of those things they go, well, we can't really talk about that. Why not? Your own tradition says there's going to be 2 days of Messiah. Anybody that maybe got really close to fulfilling all of the promises about the Mashiach about 2,000 years ago, that maybe lines up with Daniel 9, that says that it was going to be 70 years for the period of Israel, right? And then that 77 is 490. That 490 came about roughly 39 AD. That's for another teaching for a later time. But it confirms the 2 days of Messiah. Well, we don't really talk about that. We talk about something else. We talk about how Messiah can't be a man. Okay, well, we agree. He wasn't a man. Just for another topic as well. So, they have an issue with not being able to reconcile this time, but it fits perfectly when we see and we put Yeshua in that whole context. When we see that he was the promised one, he's the one who fulfilled all that, he came exactly in the right time, according to Daniel, according to the 6 days of creation, and all of that stuff. Okay, Genesis 6:3 says, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever. For he is indeed flesh, and yet his days shall be 120 years. Early on when I first got saved, I would hear people teach this as, well, he was now bringing the numbers down. That's why it was right after this period of time that, that the ages of men started to decrease. Well, this is one of the things that I'm going to put with some of the rabbinic tradition that says it took Noah 100 years to build the ark. And so, actually, it was told like this, that it only took him about 20 years to build the ark. But God let it sit for 100 years as a warning to go, you better get ready because rain's coming. Right? Either way, when you find out rabbinic tradition says that it took 100 years to build the ark, or the ark sat for about 100 years, it was 120 years in which this time period was coming to an end. It didn't have anything to do with the ages of men decreasing, or he was now establishing that an average man's life would be 120. It's not what it's about. It's about saying, hey, in 120 years from now, it's going to rain. It's going to rain a lot. So you're not going to get on that boat. So is this a potential parallel to another story? Is this that maybe a hint of another parallel when Yeshua said that in the last days, it'll be like the days of Lot. It'll be like the days of Noah. He said that in Matthew 25, I believe, or at the end part of 24. Now I am not opening the door. We had a side discussion this week. But he's going to go, yep, that's an open door. What some people try to do is go, oh, so then what that means is, when Yeshua said that it will be like in the days of Noah, then everything that was happening in the days of Noah is going to happen in the end time. So now you got people running around going, hey, they're going to manipulate your DNA with this shot, and you're going to become a Nephilim. No, that's not what it means. All he was saying is, because then you're going to read the very next sentence, it's going to be like the days of Noah. They were eating and drinking and giving in marriage, and then the judgment came. All he's saying is, the people in Noah's day weren't paying attention, they ignored the big boat, they were making fun until it rained. And then all of a sudden they were like, whoops, we missed the boat. That's all, we'll leave that at right there. That's all he was saying. Now, God measures time in Jubilees. Jubilees are 50. 50 times 120, 6,000. Okay, was he also saying that, hey, in 120 years, I'm going to bring judgment to the people of Noah's day, and or, just like in Noah's day, 6,000 years from now, I'm going to bring judgment on mankind? A parallel. Maybe. But what happens? That 6,000 in his time of Jubilee fits with 2 days of creation, 2 days of Torah, 2 days of Messiah, 6,000 years of human history, a millennial reign. And that's it. People want to know why the millennial reign was given. Why didn't he go, I'm going to have a 1,000,000-year reign. I'm going to have a 5-week reign. It was a millennial reign.
Right.
Because it was a picture of the Sabbath of rest. Let me think about it. We had some people that we knew from New Jersey. Angelo lost his sister. We all love Angelo. Angelo is absolutely hilarious, and he doesn't even try to be. He's the funniest kid. He's not even a kid, he's 30-something now. But his sister, who was 32, died of a heart attack. Just yesterday, right? And there are people that are dying of diseases, that are being murdered, and anybody that pains the loss of somebody is not even a fraction of the pain that it causes God. Right? We think we love somebody, God loves them 10 times more. So I'm thinking God would love to go for 1,000 years. I love y'all, but I really don't want to hear any more prayers. Okay, I need to take a break. I love y'all, but I'm really getting tired of watching my children get killed. Right? I'm getting tired of watching y'all fight, whatever it is. I think he wants a millennial reign where he can just rest and enjoy. So it makes sense when you put it in that context. All right. The coming of Messiah was on the conclusion of the fourth day when it says that a great light was created, right? The lesser light to rule the night and the greater light to rule the day. Matthew chapter 4 verse 16 quotes Isaiah chapter 9 verse 2 where it says that they have seen a great light when the coming of the Messiah would come. And I think that was a play, right? That the play was, that it says great light, the Messiah was a play on the great light of the fourth day, and at the end of the fourth day the Messiah came. So again, it fits. Is it something that you could say that it's emphatic? No. But like most Jewish things, you go, right? Both can be true. And that aggravates very Western-minded people. So this happened. I just had my 25th birthday in the Lord. And I've told you that the first book I ever read was Hal Lindsey's Late Great Planet Earth, right? I was well versed in end time stuff before I even knew how to love my neighbor. Let's say I was bright. That's why I gave the dramatic pause. I knew it was coming. So there was people running around. I remember attending a service here, and the guy's name was, just passed away, Charles Capps. Not just passed away a few years ago. Charles Capps. And he was talking about some of this same line of stuff. And he said we're within 3 to 5, or he said our calendar's within 3 to 5 years error. And so they looked at the birth of the Messiah. So was it the birth of Messiah or reign of Messiah? Was he Messiah at birth? Was he Messiah at the water of baptism with John? When did he actually step into the role of being Messiah? When was that 2-day period? We don't know. So we do know it wasn't the birth. If this theory is true, I have to caveat that. If this theory is true, it wasn't at birth. However, remember, he was the only one that was going to be able to be the prophet, priest, and king. Remember, there were some men, wasn't Hezekiah, was it? Saul? I think it was Saul. One of them tried to perform sacrifices, and they got scolded by Saul.
Got scolded by Samuel.
Got scolded by Samuel because he tried to offer sacrifices. And he's like, hey, bro, you're the king. That's not, you stay in your wheelhouse. This ain't your wheelhouse. This belongs to the priest. Well, there's verses that talk about, and I think it's in Isaiah 9 or maybe 7, where that this messianic figure will be both priest and king. Right? So that time and that period of time is going to come about, and I think this is what's happening. I've hinted at it. I don't know that Scott carries it up there on the little shelf he has up there, or if you have to order it from his website, from his ministry website. But he did this teaching on Melchizedek. And remember, John the Baptist was of the priestly order. And when Yeshua went to John and said, you need to baptize me, and John's like, you need to baptize me, right? And he said, we need to do this in order to fulfill all righteousness, in order to fulfill all tzedek, is what he said in Hebrew. So it's possible that it was at that moment, at the baptism of John, that he then became the priest according to the order of Melchizedek, who was going to take on that role. And now the new priest was here, ultimately fulfilled when the priest tore his robe at Yeshua's crucifixion, right? And then that's when he was kind of like, sorry, bro, I got it, right? Because it disqualified him as being high priest, and then he ripped his robe. So is that the timetable? Again, time will tell, and I'm going to give you some of the millennial timetables, and then how I can say within a certain period of time that we can know. Here's what we'll know. What view of the millennial as far as the teaching is true, and how we'll know that for sure. Okay, so this chart here is just a general chart about biblical timeline. I didn't have time to find a good one or to put a picture. I got a better one in my library that's one of these big unfolding ones. And what it has on top is the biblical history, and then below it, it has the human history. And it shows what was going on in Egypt and in Rome and in Greece and all the different places in Mesopotamia, that all this human history was going on. right? And what we know, this is undeniable, right? You cannot deny human history lines up with the biblical history. Up to right about here. It's when we go back past that, everybody's like, we can't believe those days. Can't believe that time period.
Right.
Not answers in Genesis. What's the YouTube video on Exodus?
The archaeological evidence one? Is that what you're talking about?
It's called, I'll think about it, and then I'll give it to you. And it's probably one of the best things out there on the timetable. And they show part of the reason that archaeologists don't believe so much in the biblical timeline is because it doesn't line up with the Egyptian timeline.
Right.
That it's off by a couple hundred years. Well, patterns of the evidence of the Exodus.
Yeah.
That's it. Google it, YouTube it, watch it, because they show you how the timetable does line up based off some arguments about what these particular words meant in the hieroglyphs. Patterns of the evidence of the Exodus. And when they do this, not only, I believe it's this video where they actually show of a mini pyramid that had of a guy whose name in Egyptian translates into Joseph. And the inside of his little mini pyramid tomb was painted with many colors. Kind of weird, but it matches up with a guy named Joseph in the Bible who had a coat of many colors. Right? And I believe it's in that video where they point that out. And here's the other point they point out about it. There wasn't no body in it.
Right.
Okay? Why wasn't there no body in it? Because Joseph said,
Taking
"You're
to
taking
the
me
land."
back to the promised land. You ain't leaving me here." So that's why it was empty. All right.
Hallelujah.
So this matches history, biblical history, and secular history line up perfectly. All right. But it's here where they argue. All right. This is the Genesis account up until Genesis 11. Right. Where you're going to have all of the names and all of their ages, all the way down to the 175 years that Abraham, lived. Again, that's where the debate is at. I've got in the beginning pages, because this is how my mind works, I'm a matter-of-fact kind of guy. And at the end of the book of Genesis, I don't remember when I did this, but it was within a year or two of being saved. I wrote on the very last page of the book of Genesis. Now, again, I pulled this up quickly. Their math doesn't match my math. Right? I can tell you from Adam to the birth of Noah was 1,056 years, according to Genesis 5, 1 through 28. It says Noah was 600 when the flood came. From the flood to Abraham was 297 years. Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born. Isaac was 60 when Jacob and Esau were born. Jacob lived 147 years and Joseph lived 110 years. So with those calculations, mine come down to more around the lines of 2020 sometime frame of that period. But that's, again, not a date. I'm just telling you, I disagree with their 100-year off. But that's not the point of this one. The point of this one was, if this matches perfectly with secular history, but yet it's here that we say, we can't really believe that whole first 11 chapters of Genesis thing. However, if that's true, if those ages are true, those places are true, and all of it's been true, right? All of the locations are true. And so if we just take a leap of faith and believe that the ages are true, that they were real people, then we know that we are within the period of that 6,000 years. It's just simply matching up biblical history with human history. And you can do what the rabbis did by using the biblical accounts for how long this king reigned, how long this king reigned, and then how long they were in Babylon. And you can just sit there and do the math. So we know, undeniably, that we are give or take 10 to 20 years within 6,000 at the beginning of that event. We can narrow it down a little bit more simply because of the timing of Yeshua, and we have better records. So we know that the birth of Messiah was sometime within about 3 to 5 years BC. He wasn't born at 0. And one guy, kind of a brilliant guy, actually puts his birth date on September the 11th of 3 BC. Because they were using like astrological calendars where they go back and, you know, and then the moons and all that other kind of stuff in there, but it kind of calculates something. Either way, 3 to 5 years of that 2 days, right? And so then, him being about 30 and all that other kind of stuff, it takes us to a sometime between 2027 and 2030 time period, okay? Again, if this theory is true, right? I'm not saying it is 100%. It's the one that makes the most sense, because if not, then we're going to have some real theological things come up in about 50 years, and we're going to have to answer for it. I'll be 101. Hopefully I'll still be here. But actually, no, because then that means I got a whole lot of things wrong.
Right.
Okay. Before we go to the next one. Again, the millennial reign is talked about in Revelation chapter 20 and verses 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Peter says the day of the Lord is like 1,000 years, right? It's good parallel. If the first coming of the Lord was literal, then the second coming of the Lord is going to be literal and physical.
Amen.
Okay. So the reason I point out the timetable, the 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1, 7,000, right? Because of where we're at, there are different millennial views. There are 4 different views of the millennial reign of Messiah. This first one, I completely reject. It says the kingdom was inaugurated at Messiah's resurrection. The millennial is spiritualized, and at the end of this time period, he will return and usher in the eternal state. I flat out reject that. There are, I actually have a friend who believes very similar to this. And I just said, well, all you are is a reverse Gnostic, right?
Right.
I said, Gnostics, the argument, if you see in the book of John, where he says several times that if you don't believe that the Messiah came in the flesh, then you're a heretic. You're an anti-Messiah is what he said. And so I said, all the stuff he had to do, he physically came. He physically rose. He physically died. And now you're going to go after the resurrection? It's spiritual. I said, well, then why don't you just make the case that his first coming was spiritual, believe with the Gnostics, and go, well, he didn't really come. It was a spiritual coming. It was a spiritual resurrection. Right? So you're just a Gnostic after the death is all you are.
Right.
He didn't like that. Postmillennialism. This is starting to gain ground today, called kingdom theology. This is that the kingdom was also inaugurated at Messiah's resurrection, but the church, who is reigning, but through the preaching of the gospel, the church will make the world a better place and worthy of the Messiah's return. There's some of that theory, theology, and Judaism, that we have to make the world right and ready for the Messiah. All right? That there are so many verses in the New Testament that are completely wrong, or completely contrary to this, that say there's going to become a great falling away, that there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, and things are going to get worse. So I don't know how they get there. I do know how they get there. They get this kind of, that we are the body of Christ and we are to rule and reign and take charge and blah, 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 okay? It doesn't work. There's too many scriptures that contradict that. That one is absolutely, I would argue that both of them are out. All right? But there's no way this one is real. No way. Just because there's too many counter scriptures, right? Because of Israel, because of all the physicalness of Yeshua's first coming, I can't accept that either. I can't accept that it's a spiritualized thing. So here's what that means. There's only 2 options left of the 4 main theologies about the millennial reign and the millennial period of time. And the reason I give you that timetable is we're going to find out which one of these is true by 2033 at the latest. And if the Messiah has not returned and set up his kingdom by 2033 at the latest, that means that's true.
Yeah.
Or we've all believed a lie and there's no God.
Yeah.
Which obviously don't accept that. So if that theory of that 6 days of creation and millennial reign, and because of the timetables and the measurements and the history, human history, biblical history and all that stuff, I believe this one will be true if these don't happen. All right. This is where most everybody falls nowadays, especially in America. You're more liberal kind of people. You're some people in the Catholic Church, some of the Episcopalians, your Presbyterians, your Methodists. They're going to have more of a dispensational view that everything did change at the cross. Therefore, there is no hope for Israel. There's no more restoration of Israel. There is no more restoration of the land. And because they tend to take more of a spiritualized view of things, they tend to fall in this category of an amillennialistic view. All right, so Historical premillennialism is that the Messiah will return at the end of the tribulation period in a great apostasy to utter in a literal 1,000-year reign of peace. And at the end of that 1,000 years, the enemy will be released for one more time of testing. Book of Revelation bears that out. The question is it a 3.5-year period? Is it a 7-year period? It's also referred to as the time of Jacob's trouble. Jacob's trouble is actually 20 years. We have to wait and see. Remember I said, when people put up charts that tell you in the future the 7 years is going to look like this, and then the first trumpet's going to blow in the first year, the second trumpet's going to blow in the third year, then this bowl is going to be released, and then the locust. It's when it all starts happening, we'll go, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. Oh, that's scary. Right? We have to wait. We cannot say with emphaticism how the future is going to play out. This is where most of American church is at. The dispensational premillennialistic view, which is similar to the historical view, but Messiah will return prior to the tribulation period and remove his church and return 7 years later. I used to believe that early on. I no longer believe that. Because the question then becomes, well, if he's going to remove the church, who are the people that are getting saved during the 7 years? Aren't they the church?
Right.
What? Well, they're tribulation saints. Really? Right. It's because I also reject
Right.
dispensationalism. Dispensationalism believes that there was Israel, then the church age, and then God will go back to dealing with his firstborn, Israel. When I say it this way, some people in the Messianic community will call me a heretic. You are either in the house of God or you are not.
Amen.
There's only one way to get in the house of God. It's not Torah. It's through the blood of the
Blood of
Lamb.
Messiah. Hallelujah.
And if you are not a believer in the blood of the Lamb, you are not in the house of God. That means if you're Jewish and you have rejected the Messiah, you are not in the house of God. And some people will say, well, that's replacement theology. No. I'm not. People will say, well, you believe that the church has replaced Israel. No. What I'm telling you, the Hebrew word, the kahal, the assembly of God, is Israel. And if Israel is not getting in through the blood, then Israel ain't in Israel. They're outside the camp. So until they see that whom he has died for them, they're outside the promises of God. It's almost like saying, hey, when you guys were in Babylon, you're still my people, even though you rejected me. Okay? That may be true, but they still got whooped. They still got sent into diaspora, right? Because of disbelief. So you can't say, hey, you know that whole thing I was planning on from the beginning of time in Genesis 3:15, you know that whole thing that you rejected? It's okay. No, that's why he sent them into exile into the world. Luke 19 says emphatically, because you didn't recognize the time of your visitation, all these things were going to come upon you. So, I reject that there was this Jewish period, church period, and then there's going to be a Jewish period. It's that we are all, and now you know I don't believe in a full church period at all, simply because there's the middle ground that we believe we're trying to walk, which is the church went away from all the Jewish stuff, became very anti-Semitic. We know that the Catholic Church changed the Sabbath in 365 and did all these anti-Jewish things. But we're trying to find the middle ground where we go, hey, we do it all together, one in Messiah. We're not trying to be a bunch of little Jews, and we're not trying to reject everything that God gave to the Jewish people either. We're trying to walk that fine balance. And so that's why I don't believe there was a dispensational period of time. That's why I can't accept dispensationalism, premillennialism. And this is the camp that I personally fall into now, which is sometime at the end of 6,000 years, he's going to return, he's going to set up his kingdom, he's going to rule and reign for a literal 1,000 years. There are so many verses that you have problems with if we don't accept a type of view like that. Because it says that the false prophet and the Antichrist will be thrown alive into the lake of fire, right? So you can't spiritualize that either. Right? You can't make that into some sort of metaphor. So anyway, my point of going through all of this was to say, we're going to find out sometime within the next 10 to 15 years whether or not amillennialism is true or not dispensational, but premillennialism is true. Because of that time period, we'll find out if what the rabbi said about 2 + 2 + 2 + 1 to 6,000 plus 1, whatever, however you want to word that out. We'll find out by 2033 if it's true. And if not, then we're going to have to go, Millennialism? Really? You're not coming back? I mean, did we really get our timetable? Is that wrong? I've looked at it 1,000 times, 1,000 different ways from 1,000 different sources in the historical timelines and all that kind of stuff. We're not off 50 years. We're not off 10 years as far as Messiah's birth. So, again, we'll find out. And as also as a friendly reminder, I'm just saying it's something that we need to look at. And we'll find out whether or not this theory or this belief is true. Okay? And we can discuss it, not discuss it, but I told you I wanted to give you, this is one of the paralytic views that I have about things. That the Bible is oftentimes saying the same thing two different ways. Or that the Old Testament stories in some cases were foreshadowing something else futuristically. Okay, so this is one of them. And then we'll hit Babylon a little bit next week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we bless you and praise you and thank you for this day. Thank you for your Sabbath and thank you for your word.